Our job as sales and marketing professionals is to identify decision makers and to persuade them to buy from us. This presentation shows how to identify 5 main decision-making styles and how to influence them. It's based on a 2-year study carried out by Robert Miller and Gary Williams, summarized in the May 2002 issue of the Harvard Business Review. The complete study was later published as a book titled The 5 Paths to Persuasion. Miller and Williams identified 12 commonly accepted attributes important in how people make decisions. Risk, the willingness to make decisions that might have large negative consequences. Responsibility, the desire for authority to make decisions and be held accountable for their outcome. Competitiveness is the drive and ambition to achieve more than others. Rebellion, the desire to move beyond the status quo and generally accepted alternatives. Impulsiveness, the urge to make attention-grabbing and thrilling final decisions, often very quickly. Persistence, the desire for others and for oneself to continually drive the decision-making process toward a final resolution. Fear and uncertainty, the tendency to become worried or concerned when making a particular decision. Self-absorption is the habit of becoming unduly concerned with one's own thoughts, interests, and activities. Playfulness, the desire for lively, spirited interactions with others in the decision-making process. Education is the need to learn and understand from others about the various issues involved in a decision. Intelligence and facts, the need for rational, highly accurate information. This is pure data and facts and not the other ways to learn about the various issues involved in a decision. And finally, bargains, the willingness to make spur-of-the-moment decisions provided the price is right. Miller and Williams then surveyed about 1,700 executives, mapped their answers to the 12 attributes described here, and realized their behavior fell into one of 5 groups. Charismatics like Jack Welch and Oprah Winfrey are easily enthralled with new ideas, especially bold and innovative ones, but need others to join them in thinking through the details. Thinkers like Bill Gates and Michael Dell need to cautiously and methodically work through each pro and con of every conceivable option before rendering a decision. Skeptics like Larry Ellison and Ted Turner are highly suspicious of every piece of information and will rarely trust anything that doesn't fit with their worldview. Followers like Carly Fiorina and Peter Coors make decisions based mainly on how other trusted people, including themselves, have made similar decisions in the past. And controllers like Martha Stewart and Ross Perot must be in charge of every aspect of the decision-making process and need to have some ownership of an idea before proceeding with it. This is a single-slide summary of the results of the study, in which participants were also asked to describe how others have been presenting information to them, and uncovered a staggering mismatch between how people want information presented and how others are actually presenting it. For example, close to 80% of sales presentations focus on skeptics and controllers, even though those two groups represent less than 30% of all executives. Almost no presentations are targeted at charismatics, yet that group accounts for fully a quarter of the population. Only 6% of presentations are geared towards followers, despite the fact that more than 1 of 3 executives is a follower. Click on pause to spend more time on this slide. During the remaining slides, you'll see a profile for each of the 5 decision-making styles, showing whether they seek or avoid each of the 12 attributes previously described. Understanding these differences will help you approach these different types of leaders more effectively. You will also see how each style of leadership compares to the others for each of the 12 attributes of how people make decisions. This is the profile for charismatics. Of the 12 attributes surveyed, charismatics have the strongest need for education, responsibility, persistence, risk, and intelligence and facts when making a decision. Of their aversions, they most dislike fear and uncertainty and self-absorption. Also, note that the cost is not a big factor with charismatics, as they have just a moderate desire for bargains. If you're trying to sell something to someone who gets wrapped up in the benefits and features of the product without once asking about the cost, you can be sure the person is a charismatic. Charismatics are enthusiastic imaginers, innovative risk seekers, proactive and decisive. They're responsible and accountable, bottom liners, and they are interactive. To persuade them, you should give the headlines first. Bullet points are fine, right up front. Stay grounded no matter what. They may try to go in many different directions with many different possibilities, but do your best to keep them close to home. Address risks up front. They can handle it without getting scared off if you help them develop the right vision. And follow through always. If not with them personally, with the folks they delegate to. If not clear, ask who to follow up with. Here is the profile for thinkers. Thinkers are remarkably even-keeled. They do not possess any extreme desires or aversions. Their strongest desire, and it's relatively moderate compared to the desires of other decision-making styles, was to be competitive. What ultimately drives the business decisions of thinkers is whether a proposal will make their company better than the competition, especially when the price is right. Thinkers also have a moderate desire for bargains. On the other hand, the strongest aversions were to risk and impulsiveness, which is why thinkers often need a considerable amount of time to make decisions. Thinkers are methodical and process-oriented, information-driven, quantitative and precise, relentlessly thorough, they're guarded and cautious, and they're balanced and intellectually fluid. To persuade them, you should tell your story chronologically, laying out the steps which lead to a logical conclusion. No summarizing bullet points here. In fact, if you try to do that, it may hurt you. Involve the thinker in your process. Make sure they're on board with your thought process. Be exhaustive but patient. Clarify as you go along. Allow and encourage others to join the thinking. Everybody must be on the same page at the end of this process. This is the profile for skeptics. Skeptics are highly self-absorbed. When confronted with an important choice, they do not particularly need the input of others, and they are not big on consensus management. They prefer, and they may even insist on, making decisions which are theirs alone to make. Note that skeptics desire rebellion. This is why they have little fear in taking the road not taken. Skeptics have a strong aversion to responsibility. At first, this can seem paradoxical. Although skeptics desire authority and will quickly step up to the plate at important moments, they can be quick to make excuses when they strike out. They may take more than their fair share of credit for any home runs. Skeptics have an aversion to others who are persistent. They loathe when colleagues and staff members prod them for a decision, and even gentle reminders are likely to do more harm than good. Nobody likes being rushed, but this is especially true for skeptics because of their defiant nature. Pressure tactics can easily backfire, provoking them to prolong the time they need to make their decision. Skeptics are iconoclasts. They break the molds. They're brazenly outspoken, fearlessly confident. They're assertive and demanding, determined and driven. But skeptics are visionary. To persuade them, you should establish your credibility. Make sure they know you know your stuff. You deserve to be there. Hold your ground. They will push you. Don't give up your reasonable and proper position. Keep emotions and ego in check. Don't overreact when they poke you. And go to the source of credibility. If necessary, cite the experts. Show supporting documents. Let's review the profile for followers. It is striking that followers lack any strong aversions. Specifically, followers do not actively avoid any of the 12 components in the decision-making process, and perhaps this is why they're followers. But a common misperception is that followers always avoid risk. Actually, they're neither risk-averse nor risk-seeking. They are generally neutral when it comes to making big decisions that have some degree of uncertainty. They will avoid a certain type of risk, however. They will not try something that is unproven. Followers will go forward with a risky venture as long as that type of approach has succeeded before, but they'll have great trouble with something that has no prior instances of success. Of the 5 styles of decision makers, followers are the ones with the strongest desire for bargains. For them, a decrease in price can substantially offset the risks involved with trying something new and untested. In some cases, they might think that the cost of implementing something has become so low that they simply can't afford not to try it. Interestingly, followers have a relatively strong desire for playfulness in the decision-making process. This is especially true when it comes to light-spirited haggling. They enjoy the give and take of trying to get someone to give them the best deal. Another somewhat counterintuitive finding is that followers have a modest desire to be impulsive. They can be spontaneous, making a decision on the spot, but again, only after someone has proven to them that a proposal has worked before. Followers are devoted to the tried and true. They're averse to the new. They're conscientious corporate citizens. They're good at people handling. They're empathetic, but they are difficult to identify. To persuade them, you should consider that if you're in doubt, assume the subject is a follower. Supply proof, and more proof that what you are proposing has worked before in similar situations. Keep it simple. Don't distract with too much information. And link the new to the old, to the tried and the true. Finally, here's the profile for controllers. They have a number of extreme likes and dislikes. In particular, note how strong their tendency towards self-absorption is, a level that's nearly off the scale. Controllers also have a strong tendency to make decisions based on fear and uncertainty. And they have very much a desire to be both rebellious and impulsive. Controllers also have several extreme aversions. They strongly avoid education and intelligence and facts, which relates back to their tendency towards self-absorption. Specifically, even though controllers might ask for a lot of information, they won't actually use it to make their decision. All they really need is their own input and gut feelings. Also note how strongly controllers will avoid both risk and responsibility. They're terrified of making a wrong move, a fear that's sometimes paralyzing, and when things go wrong, they can be blamers. Lastly, note the extent to which controllers dislike people who are persistent. Controllers make decisions based on their own timetable, and they hate being pressured by others to move any faster than that. Controllers are driven by fear. They are proactive, They're fiercely self-reliant, absolute and resolute. They're meticulous, and they are unyielding perfectionists. To persuade them, you should enable action, but don't force it. Provide all the info and background they need to make the right decision, but don't push them to actually make that decision. Fly below the radar. Work through the decision maker's lieutenants if possible. Build alliances. Partner with those who know how to work the controller's various systems of rules and regulations. And draw your line and hold to it. Understand your own limits of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable to you. It's frequently not apparent what kind of decision maker your subject is. To help read people, don't look at their personalities, but observe their actions. Use a process of elimination to narrow the choices by asking some acid test questions. Is the person always looking for the next big idea, and does he want information in headlines and bulleted items? If so, the person is possibly a charismatic. Is the person process-oriented and balanced, always weighing the pros and cons of a decision? If so, that person's probably a thinker. Is this person suspicious of every piece of data, and does he or she make snap judgments? If so, the person is possibly a skeptic. Does the person need to be in charge of all the decision-making process? If so, the person is possibly a controller. Does the person move forward only with solutions that have worked before in some variation or another? If so, the person is possibly a follower. Here are some additional criteria to consider. Pause the presentation to review and check them out. Sometimes it's difficult to decide between two decision-making types. For this, the behavioral dial may come in handy. Thinkers are at the center because this style is most stable. On opposite sides of the thinker are charismatics and controllers, and followers and skeptics. Focus on risk and responsibility to better understand your subject and ultimately classify that person's decision-making style. So charismatics and skeptics tend to seek risk, while followers and controllers avoid it. Likewise, followers and charismatics seek responsibility, while skeptics and controllers tend to avoid it. You should never really wonder if your subject is a follower or a skeptic, or a charismatic or a controller. If so, think through some of the things we've already covered, or get to know your subject better. It's sometimes confusing to decide between adjacent quadrants on the dial. So if you're unsure if your subject is a follower or a charismatic, consider how that person feels about risk. If he or she seeks risk, they're more likely a charismatic. But if they avoid risk, he or she is more likely a follower. Between a charismatic and a skeptic, if the subject avoids responsibility, it's a skeptic. But if the subject seeks responsibility, he or she is probably a charismatic. If wondering between controllers and skeptics, controllers will avoid risk, while skeptics will seek it out. And finally, to decide between a follower and a controller, followers will seek out responsibility, while controllers will avoid it. Once you've settled upon the kind of decision maker you're dealing with, use the proper tactics for the pre-sales call activity, during the sales call itself, and the follow-up. These slides provide those details for each of the decision-making styles. The remaining slides provide an interesting gauged comparison of the 5 decision-making styles for each of the 12 attributes.